are all settling down, you should have 2 assignments or 2 packets in front of you. One is a handout for your future use to jot notes down as you go, as well as, because this is a workshop, and not like a classroom or a lecture, there will be some stuff where I will ask you to practice some of the things we're talking about on the paper. If you are here and you're not here for Dr. Roth's class, you're here for extra credit for your own class, there is an additional practice in the handout that your professor may or may not ask for. So do keep that in mind. Hi, Dr. Roth. Give me some space.
Okay. And as a reminder, your 77 number, your name, and the class for which you're here. And I'll select these at the end of the time, and then your professors will be notified that you were in attendance. Okay, and you have to stay the whole time to get credit.
And those of you here for Dr. Roth, she's watching you anyway, so. Okay. Dr. Roth, do you need handouts? Okay, so we'll just say the cutoff is 1:50, and so when you're ready to go, we will end, and that way if people have questions and they're not part of your class, they can ask. That should be good enough. All right, does anyone need handouts? Everyone have 2 packets? Okay. How are you? There's 1. Here's 2. Welcome. 1. And 2. And 2. Right back. I'm going to start, so if I just give these to you so people, wait, don't go away. There you go. So if people come in late, you can just give them a handout.
Absolutely.
Cool. Wherever you can find a seat. All right, I think we're ready. We're all ready? All right. So welcome to the second workshop second writing workshop this semester. We are covering revision strategies today. I recognize that revision can often be very frustrating. You guys get a lot of feedback from your professors. You get a lot of feedback, hopefully, from your peers. Sometimes you feel like you're a little stuck. So what I'm going to hopefully do today is give you a couple of strategies that cover a wide breadth of potential revision options that you can kind of use and tailor to your own. Okay? So before we start, tell me when Dr. Roth or whoever your professor is, when they tell you to revise your paper, what do you think that means? What does that mean in your head? Anyone? To make it better, right? To fix what's wrong? Largely? Okay. So revision is, yes, it is fixing what's wrong, but by focusing on just what's wrong, you kind of can sometimes miss some of the bigger pictures that will help you get a better grade, write a better essay, and be kind of more effective. So revision is, yes, it is editing. It is fixing mistakes. It is doing what the professor has asked you to do. It is following through with your peers' advice. But revision is also to look at your paper in a new way, or to rethink how to approach your topic or your organization in a way that you are not currently doing, to see if you can find a better way of revising your paper. Revision, etymologically, what the word means is to re-see or rethink your paper. And so that requires a very different strategy than simply going through the feedback and trying to figure out what to do next, right? So what I have on your handout, you've got two. One is an essay that I give my students. That's going to kind of be our practice. And then the handout is going to be where you can jot notes and do those kind of things. So like I said, the strategies that I have for you today, I have three. We'll probably only get to two, and the third one's going to be a quick one. But they are designed to give you sort of a practical application to covering as much as possible and trying to deal with the most important types of revision than simply dealing with proofreading, sentence structure, commas, those sort of things. Sort of get the most bang out of your buck, essentially. So the strategy in finding a good revision strategy is to focus on the big stuff. Those are called global issues, right? You can have an essay that is beautifully written, it has wonderful sentence structure, it has good use of imagery, but if it doesn't do what you're supposed to do, or if it's missing something, it doesn't really matter. If you can't convey your message, even if you can write beautifully, it's not going to help. And so you have to focus on the big stuff first. So what I want to start with is one particular strategy. So the essay you have in front of you, I'm sorry if you haven't seen the first Deadpool. I believe there are spoilers in there, but it's been about, what, 5 years? So you probably have heard it already. So what I have here is an essay that I do with my students. So it is something that I wrote, and I use it in my classroom to talk about peer review and revision strategies. And what you see on the side is a whole bunch of comments, right? That looks really ugly. It looks really overwhelming. Would you agree? That's a lot of stuff. These comments are from some of my students. So they read the paper as a class, they wrote comments down, and I just transcribed them onto the paper. So when you guys get papers back from your professor, do you get lots of stuff written on? Is there a lot of feedback? Does it feel really kind of overwhelming about where to start? Okay. So the first strategy I want to practice is basically categorizing what's most important and what's least important and developing a strategy from there. So when you want to think about what's most important, I would say the most important thing is your essay's purpose, right? Thesis statement, audience, what is the job that you are supposed to be doing in this paper? The second most important thing is the content you put in there, right? If you don't have a thesis statement, the content doesn't matter nearly as much. The content needs to support the thesis statement. The thesis statement and the purpose are largely the most important part of your paper. So if you have a good thesis statement, then you can start thinking about content. After that, how you put the content together in a way that supports the thesis and makes sense. The fourth thing here on the bottom, that's largely sentence level stuff, diction, what words you use, how you phrase things. But that's all the way at the bottom. So what I have on the handout on the second page of the packet is sort of a categories on the back of the title page. So I have sort of categories. And what I want you to do to sort of practice is to look at the comments that my students have done on this paper. Ignore the paper for now. Just look at the comments. Can you put them into categories from most important to least important? And see if we can go from there. Okay? You're welcome to work with a partner, or you can work on it yourself if you feel comfortable. And so I'll give you maybe 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, to see how many comments you are able to put into categories. So what seems like the most pressing issue, and what seems like the least pressing issue, and what's kind of in between. All right, so I'm going to stop you, simply because we are limited on time. But before we talk about the categories and what you made most important and least important, I want to talk about the comments themselves first. So what do you notice about the comments as you were going through them? Any things stand out to you? Did you notice any repetition of similar comments? Did you notice any patterns? Did you find any comments to be particularly vague or brief or unhelpful? Did you find any comments to be really helpful or really descriptive or in-depth? No one noticed anything? Absolutely nothing?
A lot of the comments referred to stuff being unclear to the reader.
Right, so there's a lot of references to, like, I don't understand, or I don't know what you're doing with this, or this is really unclear, right? That tells us we're either talking about content, or we're talking about simply the sentence structure not being clear. And it's important, when you guys get feedback, it's important that you actually are able to interpret what people are saying, right? These particular comments don't give a lot of details. They sort of point to specific things, and they say very broad things. Anything else that you noticed? So there are several references to the thesis, right? That the thesis is contradictory, or they're not really sure how the person feels about it, or that the argument is unclear, or things say different things throughout the paper, right? So what you should be seeing, even if you're not telling me, is that you should see a pattern. You should see a pattern, and when you start to see patterns of feedback, that often tells you that something really big is happening here, something really important that you need to pay attention to. If you see like one comment about one thing and you don't see it anywhere else, you can largely say it's probably a less important issue, okay? So what sort of categories did you guys come up with, or what did you find to be the most significant thing to deal with? What's at the top of your list?
Purpose?
Sorry?
No. I think I said the wrong thing.
What did you find to be the most important thing, is what I'm saying. What's at the top of your hierarchy? What seems to be the most important comments to deal with, and what seems to be the least important comments to deal with?
Like the comments are talking about how the thesis is unclear, are going to probably be the most important, because the thesis is supposed to like explain the whole of the essay.
Right, anything to do with a thesis, that's the first thing you should tackle, okay? And the way that you would do that in a paper is you would first want to identify where the thesis is, and then where the thesis is repeated or referred to, or whether or not that is specific. So what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm not going to ask you to read the essay yet, but I'm going to ask you to write this question down so that when we get to it, you remember. So the question is, where is the thesis first stated? Where is the thesis referred to or repeated? And then how is the thesis addressed at the end of the paper in the conclusion? And in some essays, depending on where you're at in the drafting stage, depending on how the paper is, in some essays, simply knowing that your thesis is being inconsistent and working through the thesis can get you very far in your revision. And we'll determine whether or not that's true in the case of this essay. What did you find to be the least important of the comments? What was the thing that you were not, if this was your paper, you were not going to immediately run home and work on?
Comment 13, elaborate. I mean, like, the writer actually did kind of explain what his instability, what his power was, but it says elaborate. I think elaborate means explain, I think. So
Okay.
It was a little bit jarring. It was a little bit jarring why it would be more elaboration, but it's already elaborated.
Yeah, and that sort of like that, if you have a comment or you have feedback that says you're not explaining this clearly, could you add more detail? Sometimes that's really important, and sometimes that's just a result of not having a clear thesis, right, or not having a clear purpose. And so, you know, if you get the thesis down, sometimes a lot of these issues just kind of disappear, or they fall off because you're focusing. So when I went through it, I mean, this is very broad. This is how I kind of categorized the comments. So the most important thing is obviously thesis and consistency. And then it goes from there, right? Evidence, the things that say elaborate, as well as the things that say, like, I don't think you need this, or I don't understand the importance of this. And then I follow that all the way at the bottom with grammar issues, diction, and spots that seem a little clunky or incohesive. And you'll notice the comments on the back, the very last comment is sort of a list of grammar issues, and that's because my students didn't feel like it was that important. They just lumped everything together. So, okay. So the second strategy I want to deal with, and we'll kind of play around with these depending on how much time we have, is what you can use if you haven't had feedback yet. So often this is very early in the drafting stage. Either you have a rough draft or you're still planning your draft. And that is to focus on what kind of essay you're writing, which is called genre. So how many of you have covered genre in 101 so far? Or know what I mean when I say genre? Vaguely. So genre is largely about what kind of essay, and genre will tell you a lot about what the essay should do, right? If you are writing a letter to someone, you know who the audience is. You also know the format. If you're writing a persuasive essay, you know your audience and you know the format. If you are writing a descriptive narrative, your audience is going to be different than that of a persuasive argument, and the organization is going to be a little different. So if you can pay attention to genre, you can largely go through a whole bunch of rhetorical strategies that should help you focus. So in this particular strategy, which takes time but also is good for planning, the first thing you need to do is you need to identify the genre and set up your expectations. So if you flip to the next page in your handout, not the essay, the handout itself, you'll see kind of a list of questions. It's like a checklist. And you can jot down your expectations for this kind of essay and then use it to tailor any drafting that you do. So ask questions about your genre to guide your revision, and then once you've done that, identify particular patterns. So we're going to do this for the essay you have in front of you. So this is a movie review, which means it has a particular purpose, it has a particular audience, and you have to tailor what you're doing to that audience. So go ahead and write next to genre movie review. How many of you have read a movie review before? Or a review of anything? Only like 5 of you? 6 of you? Okay.
Does video format does video format include as well? Video format.
Video format?
Of reviews.
I'm not sure what you mean by that. Like if you see a review on a video?
Kind of like it's kind of like a video essay of something, kind of like explaining something on YouTube.
Like a, yes, possibly. Probably I'd have to see it, but yeah, I could see it, how that would be possible.
It's kind of like someone videoing themselves speaking their review.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Yes, that's a review. It's not written down, but yeah. And the audience is tailored a little bit different because it's a YouTube or probably someone subscribed to the channel, but yeah, same concept. So this is a film review or a movie review. I want you to see if you can think through the questions and the categories here. So you would start with movie review and then audience, right? Who is likely to read a movie review? What kind of audience?
Someone who might be considering seeing the movie.
Right, which would tell us it's not a diehard fan, right? So this is about Deadpool. How many of you seen Deadpool? How many of you needed a movie review to decide to go see it? None, right? So it's probably going to be someone who is unfamiliar with the character, unfamiliar with the genre itself of superhero films, or is just unclear but not super fans and not people who understand what it is. So you're looking at an audience that needs to make a decision and they haven't already made a decision, which is very important. Okay? So go ahead and take a minute and see if you can fill out the rest of the checklist. What would you expect to see in a movie review? So I'm going to stop you. Ideally, if you spend enough time on just this part, you should get lots of information about what your essay should do and should not do, right? So let's just go down the checklist. Purpose of a genre. So what is the purpose of a film review? Why do you read film reviews?
Decide whether or not you want to see a movie.
Decide whether or not you want to go see a movie. So what is the purpose in writing a film review?
To persuade people whether or not to go see a movie.
Right, to make a determination as to whether or not the movie is worth seeing. Okay, so that's a very simple purpose. That also tells you what your thesis statement should largely say, right? Is this film worth it? Is this film not worth it? And then why? Second part, content. What you expect a movie review to have in it?
Premise of the movie?
Hmm?
The short premise or summary of the movie?
A plot summary, preferably without spoilers, right?
Yeah.
Or to spoil them.
I mean, sometimes
Or
there
spoiler
are
warning.
spoilers and kind of not spoiling.
Yeah, it depends on how old the film is
Yeah.
and how mean the film reviewer is. But yes, if there are spoilers, there are spoiler warnings, and it's usually very early. What else would you expect to find in a film review?
A summary of the character, or characters.
Names, right? Actors, kind of where they fit in the overall summary. What else? I saw a hand back there, I think. No?
Maybe like the film's rating.
Sorry?
Maybe like the film's like rating.
Yeah, it's really important whether or not to know to take your 6-year-old to see Deadpool. Yeah, or your grandmother. Yeah, so film rating, probably who it's appropriate for, right? Sort of the audience that would like this. What else?
Kind of objective, positive aspects of the movie.
And when we're talking about film, we're talking about probably CGI, right? Or stunts,
CG
or
kind of actors' ability to act.
quality of acting,
the
quality of
direction.
cinematography.
Direction of the movie.
All of these things are potential things to talk about, right? Because we are talking about film. And likely a film review is also going to include a particular scene to demonstrate what they're trying to say about the film, okay? So lots of different types of content. Targeted audience, right? We already went over this. People who are on the fence about Deadpool, and you want to be able to tell this on the fence whether or not the film is worth seeing and also whether or not it's appropriate, okay? Diction, so word choice. What did you guys put for word choice? Should it be formal, informal, a mix of two?
I think it kind of depends on the reviewer, because there are
Mhm.
certain like professional reviewers and there are certain that aren't. But I think for this movie, I think it would be appropriate to use like unprofessional diction.
Probably, especially if you want to highlight who should not see this. And it's going to depend, right? New York Times, maybe not, but Den of Geek, absolutely, right? You're probably also going to see references and word choice that's specific to the genre, things about superheroes, things about superhero film, things about Deadpool specifically and the universe he lives in, but largely somewhere between formality and informal depending on who you're targeting and where you're publishing. Types of evidence. What sort of details do you expect? Do you expect statistics? Do you expect psychology case studies in a film review? What do you expect?
I expect an overall opinion of the film.
Maybe other critics,
Yeah.
but largely the evidence is going to be purely from the film, right? If you see sociological statistics, probably might have a genre problem. And the last part, rhetorical strategies, we'll kind of get to. But ethos is really important. Ethos, you guys all covered ethos yet? Yeah, so it's about authority. So what is the authority of this particular person to speak on this topic? And so you want to look for how that person is creating authority, okay? So we have lots of information that we already know about the genre before you even read the paper. So the next part is to ask targeted questions concerning genre, right? Do I have enough information or too much information about the film? Do I talk about the actors and their acting ability? Do I stick to discussions of the film or do I go beyond discussions of the film? Do I make a quality assessment on whether or not people should see this film? Do I indicate who this is for or do I ignore that, right? Very specific questions that you can ask. So I'm going to go ahead and have you guys read the essay. And we could probably get through the first 2 pages for time's sake, but see how well you can answer these questions now, including the one I asked you to write down before we went to genre. So the things I want you to answer, how well does the essay stick to the checklist we just discussed? And what can you say about the thesis, or the questions that the students already had? All right, so I want to go start with the genre question, and then we'll talk about the thesis question. So you have a lot of information in front of you just going through the genre checklist. How well does this particular essay fit the genre? Are there places it's doing its job? Are there places it's not doing its job? What do you see? You can always ask Dr. Roth to start calling on some of you. So is it perfect? We're good?
No.
No. So let's talk about why it's not perfect, right? If you're going to be silent, I expect that means that everything's fantastic and there's nothing to do, right? But that's not the case, right? So what is wrong with the essay and how does it fit in what we're talking about?
The tone's uneven.
What do you mean exactly?
Like, well, not the tone, like, the opinion's uneven. Like,
We're talking about the thesis?
Yeah, the thesis literally says the movie is awful, and then, like, it says it's so awful. And then the first sentence of the third paragraph says, this movie has Ryan Reynolds doing an excellent job. I had so much fun watching this film. Like,
Right.
I mean,
And it continues, right? It goes back and forth all the time, which means what's wrong? It's not just that it's uneven, but what did the comments tell us? It was inconsistent, unclear, right? That question, those 3 questions I asked you to write down. Where's thesis? Where do we see references to it? And what does it say at the end? And what we get from the sense is what? That the movie is worth seeing or it's not worth seeing?
I don't know.
It is worth seeing, but kind of collides with the first saying, kind of like saying the movie is terrible. I'm not sure if it's kind of like a tongue-in-cheek way of kind of flipping the head on the reader. I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, so in this particular case, we know that the purpose is a little muddled, right? At the very least. And if this is your paper, you have to figure out what you're going to do with that. And that is the very first thing you should figure out, right? What is it that I feel about this film, and how am I assessing the quality? So largely, if we were to sit down and go through it, the positives far outweigh the negatives, if you were to go through the whole thing. And so that would tell us that the person probably feels that Deadpool is absolutely worth seeing and recommends it. And so you would want to go through and you would want to clarify your thesis and then go through and figure out where you're being unclear and fix that, right? What else do you see? What else is wrong? Or what else needs to be looked at again? Is it just the thesis? Go ahead.
Like weird references towards other characters, and kind of like they are included in this quote-unquote comic, but aren't really relevant to the thesis or the essay. And they kind of put it in kind of like a little jarring for people who don't know kind of X-Men or Deadpool.
Right, so remember we talked about audience? So the targeted audience is probably going to be people who are somewhat unfamiliar with this, right? Because if you know Deadpool, you're probably going to go see it anyways, you're not going to read a review. So that tells us that the audience that is being targeted here is not the audience that should be targeted. We have content that does not work with the thesis. We have content that goes beyond the bounds of the film, right? Those are things that can probably be cut out or contextualized depending on what you're doing with it. What else do you see? Is that it? Nothing else? That fixes everything? A paper, A+, we're done?
Grammatical errors.
Huh?
There's a lot of grammatical errors. Well, not a lot, but there are a couple of grammatical errors.
There are grammatical errors, and part of the reason that I don't emphasize grammatical errors is because once you go through the content and the big stuff, those grammar errors might go away, right? A lot of the, if you were to go through and look at the run-on sentences, a lot of them are sentences that I would cut out anyways. So it doesn't even matter at that point. But yes, there are grammatical errors.
The kind of title, Not Your Grandfather's Wonder Woman. When I first read it, only the title, I thought it was kind of like a deconstruction of some other kind of unconventional superheroes, but it's just the explanation of the movie. I was just slightly disappointed, maybe, but it's kind of like it's kind of misleading, I think, and it should be kind of changed into something more simpler, or kind of just don't have the title at all.
Yeah, I mean, there is something there, which is that Deadpool, as you all know, is not a typical superhero, right? And so there's an idea there that needs to be fleshed out that's not coming across clear. And the thesis would really clarify that as well as the type of content. Anything else you want to throw out there? So this was your paper. What is the first thing you would do? What does your revision plan look like? What is the steps you're going to take to make this paper a better film review? What's the first thing you'll do?
I mean, the first thing that I would tackle is figuring out what I wanted my thesis to actually say, and making sure that it was clear.
Yeah, so that would mean going through and combing through all the references to the thesis and making sure it's crystal clear and everything fits. What's the second step you might take?
Make sure that the essay is consistent and that don't contradict my thesis.
That would be part of thesis, but then we're talking about maybe support, right? Making sure the support or the evidence that you're using continues to support that thesis. What might be the third step? And we'll stop there. You've got thesis, you've got content. What might be your next step?
Kind of like editing out all the unnecessary parts, non-related, non-important, kind of misleading parts.
Yeah,
And kind of make it
deciding
more cohesive.
where you need to cut, deciding where you need to group together or make cohesive, and probably where you also need to elaborate.
Okay.
Yeah, so a little bit of surgery there. Okay, I have one more thing that I'm going to go over with you. I'm going to skip this cohesion part. And this is a shortcut revision plan. I didn't have enough highlighters, so I didn't bring them. But this is how I often teach organization. So here's what I want you to do with the essay. I want you to find the thesis statement, which you've already done, right? I want you to star the thesis statement. And then I want you to underline the topic sentence for each body paragraph, and just the topic sentence. So as you're doing this, we don't have time to do the whole paper, but I want you to take the back of your handout, wherever you have a good blank area. So not the back of the essay, but the back of the handout, because you need your essay. What I want you to do is I want you to first write the thesis statement as it appears. So what this particular exercise does, it is a bit of a shortcut, but it also hopefully helps you see whether or not your essay has an organizational plan and whether or not you have consistency. So write the thesis, and then underneath the thesis, write the first topic sentence. And then the second topic sentence, and however far you got. So why don't we stop at 3 topic sentences? So I want to be mindful of Dr. Roth's class time. What would happen if you just continued to do this? You would have probably 9 sentences, I believe. What this does is sort of checks consistency. If you were to put the essay away and just have the thesis, the topic sentences, and then the main idea of the conclusion, and you read them as a whole, if your essay is organized and structured in a way, it should make sense to someone who's not paying attention. In this case, you could probably already see there's not much cohesion in the ideas, right? It is already a mess, even if we just look at topic sentences. So this is a way to kind of check your organization and check cohesion, and it's a bit of like a shortcut. So these are all 3 different revision plans that you can put into effect depending on what you're dealing with, depending on where you're at in the process, and depending on what helps you the most. Okay? Do you guys have any questions since we're out of time? No? It's like the quietest workshop I've had. Okay. If you have no questions, by all means, our last writing workshop is April 17th, and we're going to do annotated bibliographies as well as harder MLA and APA citation stuff. So if you come, bring questions.
Let me remind you, if you don't know your 77 number, please make sure I can read.